for the hardest-hitting show in talk radio. The true progressive voice since 2012. This is Southpaws.
And welcome to Southpaws on the Pacifica Radio Network. We are the leaders of the revolution. I'm Darren Gibson, your host for today. Jurors are being seated for the Trump hush money trial. That's been an interesting process, including Trump falling asleep the first 2 days of the trial. We'll talk about that. We'll also mention climate change is going to hit economically about $38 trillion a year by the year 2049. So we'll talk about climate change on this episode. We'll also have articles about transgender kids' rights as the states go in to try and ban aftercare for transgender children. Although Sweden is leading the way, passing a law to make it easier for young people to legally change their gender. We have to talk about former Michigan House Leader Lee Chatfield. He is being charged with crimes. We'll tell you all about that. We've got plenty of stuff to talk about today, but before we get started, a couple of reminders. You can follow us on social media by going to facebook.com/Southpaws Radio Show. You can follow us on X, the former Twitter, at Southpaws Radio. You can follow us on Tumblr at southpawsradioshow.tumblr.com. You can follow us on YouTube and Mastodon by doing a search for Southpaws Radio. You can become a patron of the show by going to patreon.com/Southpaws Radio. You can listen to the show anytime at Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Podcast Addict, Podvine, and Pandora by doing a search for Southpaws. Once you found our logo, you found us. We send links to our weekly episodes to our Facebook, X, Tumblr, YouTube, and Mastodon accounts. You can listen to us on Global Community Radio Channel 1 every Saturday night at 11 Eastern, and you can listen to us on great Pacifica stations including KCEI in Taos, New Mexico, KZGM in Kabul, Missouri, and KEPJ in San Antonio, Texas. So be sure to listen to us on your local Pacifica affiliate. We would greatly appreciate that. We're recording this show on Thursday, April 18th, 2024. Let's go ahead and start this week's show by talking about the Trump hush money trial. This is Michael R. Sizak, Jennifer Peltz, Jake Offenhartz, and Alana Durkin-Richer writing for the Associated Press. This is dated April 17th out of New York. The first 7 jurors for Donald Trump's hush money trial were seated Tuesday after lawyers grilled the jury pool about their social media posts, political views, and personal lives to decide who can sit in fair judgment of Trump. Again, they refer to Trump as former president. We don't refer him as that on the show. The panelists who were selected are an information technology worker, an English teacher, an oncology nurse, a sales professional, a software engineer, and 2 lawyers. 11 more people still must be sworn in before opening statements begin as early as next week in the first criminal trial of a former commander-in-chief. It's a moment of reckoning for Trump, who has tried to put off his prosecutions until after the November election and casts himself as the victim of a politically motivated justice system. The trial puts Trump's legal problems at the center of his closely contested race against President Joe Biden. It's the first of Trump's 4 criminal cases to reach trial, and it may be the only one to return a verdict before voters decide whether to elect the presumptive GOP presidential nominee. The methodical process unfolding in the Manhattan courtroom highlights the challenge of finding people who can fairly judge the polarizing defendant in the city where he built his real estate empire before being elected president in 2016. Even so, jury selection moved quicker than expected Tuesday afternoon. It was set to resume Thursday. On his way out of the courthouse, Trump stopped in the hallway to rail against the case to reporters, accusing Judge Juan Merchan of rushing the trial. He has denied any wrongdoing. Trump, who pushed unsuccessfully to have Merchan removed from the case, said, quote, "We're going to continue our fight against this judge," end of quote. During an appearance later Tuesday at a bodega in Harlem, Trump was asked what he thought of the jurors he had seen. He said it was a little bit early to see, adding, quote, "We'll see what happens," end of quote. Over 2 days, dozens of potential jurors have been excused after saying they cannot be impartial or because they had other commitments. Trump's lawyers challenged a handful of people over social media posts, and one person was dismissed over a 2017 post about Trump that said, "Lock him up." Several would-be jurors told the judge they believe they could decide the case fairly no matter their feelings about Trump or his policies as president. Trump looked down in the courtroom as potential jurors whose names are known only to prosecutors. Trump and their legal teams shared details of their lives and impressions of him. The judge admonished Trump at one point after he spoke loudly and gestured while the judge questioned one woman about a social media post. Burchin said, quote, "I don't know what he was uttering, but it was audible and he was gesturing, and he was speaking in the direction of the juror. I won't tolerate that. I will not tolerate any jurors being intimidated in this courtroom." End of quote. Prosecutor Joshua Steinglass took Trump's notoriety head on, telling the jury pool that attorneys were not looking for people who had been living under a rock for the past 8 years. They just needed to keep an open mind. He said, quote, "This case has nothing to do with your personal politics. It's not a referendum on the Trump presidency or a popularity contest or who you're going to vote for in November. We don't care. This case is about whether this man broke the law." End of quote. Trump has pleaded not guilty to 34 felony counts of falsifying business records as part of an alleged affair to keep salacious and, he says, bogus stories about his sex life from emerging during the 2016 campaign. In particular, the allegation that he slept with former porn star Stormy Daniels. Of course, this would have been while Melania was pregnant. And Trump selling Bibles. This man violates the 10 Commandments more than anybody. Oh, boy. With the trial expected to last for 6 weeks or more, several jury pool members brought up plans they have for Memorial Day and beyond. One man was excused after saying he feared his ability to be impartial could be compromised by unconscious bias from growing up in Texas and working in finance with people who intellectually tend to slant Republican. Another person told the judge, quote, "I'm not sure that I can say beyond a reasonable doubt that I can be fair. I can try, but I'm not 100% sure I can be fair." End of quote. She was also dismissed. One person chosen to sit on the jury said he found Trump fascinating, adding that he, quote, "walks into a room and he sets people off one way or another." End of quote. Another woman said she disagrees with Trump's policies and sometimes finds herself frustrated by him, but she pledged to be fair and impartial, telling defense lawyer Todd Blanche that she would give her level-headed best if she were picked for the jury. She said, quote, "I didn't sleep last night thinking about could I do that." End of quote. Trump broke into a grin, nodding his head in an exaggerated manner when one person said he has read 2 of Trump's books, The Art of the Deal and How to Get Rich. The man, who said some of his wife's family members are lobbyists for the Republican Party, said he didn't think there was anything that would prevent him from looking at the case fairly. He said, quote, "I feel that no one's above the law." End of quote. The charges center on $130,000 in payments that Trump's company made to his then lawyer, Michael Cohen. He paid the sum on Trump's behalf to keep porn actress Stormy Daniels from going public with her claims of a sexual encounter with Trump a decade earlier. Trump has denied the encounter ever happened. Prosecutors say the payments to Cohen were logged falsely as legal fees. The prosecution has described the money as being part of a scheme to bury damaging stories Trump feared could help his opponent in the 2016 race, particularly as Trump's reputation was suffering at the time from comments he made about women, including where he could grab them, and they let them get away with anything. Trump has acknowledged reimbursing Cohen for the payment and that it was designed to stop Daniels from going public about the alleged encounter. But Trump said it had nothing to do with the campaign. He hinted Tuesday at the defense his legal team will mount, telling reporters, quote, "I was paying a lawyer and marked it down as a legal expense. That's exactly what it was. And you get indicted over that?" End of quote. If convicted of falsifying business records, Trump faces up to 4 years in prison, though there's no guarantee that he will get time behind bars. And speaking of Trump, let's get to Trump's social media. This is great news. Trump thought he was going to make billions off of this, and instead the stock is going down worse than the Hindenburg. This is the Associated Press, dated April 15th out of New York. The stock price for Donald Trump's social media company slid again Monday, pushing it more than 66% below its peak set last month. Trump Media and Technology Group closed down 18.4% at $26.61 as more of the euphoria that surrounded the stock fades. It's a sharp come down since nearing $80 after the owner of Truth Social merged with a shell company to get its stock trading on the NASDAQ under the symbol DJT for Donald Trump's initials. Part of the decline may be due to criticism that the stock price had zoomed way past what skeptics said the money-losing company is worth, particularly one with tough odds for success. But another part is also likely because of action Trump Media took Monday. The company filed documents with the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission that opened the door for the future potential sale of millions of shares. The document, called an S-1, relates to warrants held by investors that can be transformed into shares of stock, as well as shares held by company insiders. The filing also includes all the shares held by Trump himself. Trump, though, remains under a lockup deal that largely restricts him from selling his shares for another roughly 5 months. Donald Trump Jr., who's also a director on the board, and CEO Devin Nunes are also bound by the lockup. Typically, all shares of stock held by insiders subject to lockup deals are included in such filings, according to Jay Ritter, an expert on initial public offerings of stock at the University of Florida's Warrington College of Business. The filing does not necessarily mean any investors are planning to sell their shares, according to Sarasota, Florida-based Trump Media and Technology Group in a statement. Trump Media got its place on the NASDAQ after merging with a company called Digital World Acquisition Corporation, which was essentially a pile of cash looking for a target to merge with. It's an example of what's called a Special Purpose Acquisition Company, or SPAC, which can give young companies quicker and easier routes to getting their shares trading publicly. S-1 filings are typically filed quickly after an SPAC deal closes, usually within 15 or 30 days. That's according to Christy Marvin, founder of SPACinsider.com, which specializes in SPAC deals. The exercise of warrants referenced in Trump Media's S-1 filing would increase the number of shares outstanding for the company. That in turn could put more downward pressure on the stock price. When something becomes more available, it tends to fall in price unless demand for it picks up accordingly. The drop in Trump Media's stock price over the last few weeks hurts its shareholders, who experts say are mostly smaller-pocketed investors rather than big institutions. Several users of Truth Social have said they bought shares to show their support for Trump. The drop also puts a huge hit on Trump's finances directly. He could personally own nearly 114.8 million shares depending on the company's performance. That would be worth $3.15 billion at its current price. On March 27th, that worth was nearly $7.6 billion, so he's lost more than half of the money. On Monday, Trump arrived at a New York court for the start of jury selection in his hush money trial. It's the first trial of any former U.S. commander-in-chief. So there you go, folks. Yep, that Truth Social stock is looking worse and worse. And his GoFundMe raising money for his legal fees, that's going terrible as well. I think he's fleeced his flock way too much. Oh, my gosh. All right, let's go to our next story here. Speaking about money, this has to do with climate change and the economic bite that will happen under different new studies that have come out. This is Seth Borenstein writing for the Associated Press. This is dated April 17th. Climate change will reduce future global income by about 19% in the next 25 years compared to a fictional world that's not warming, with the poorest areas and those least responsible for heating the atmosphere taking the biggest monetary hit. That's according to a new study. According to Wednesday's study in the journal Nature by researchers at Germany's Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research, climate change's economic bite and how much people make is already locked in at about $38 trillion a year by the year 2049. By 2100, the financial cost could hit twice what previous studies estimate. Study co-author Liani Wenz, a climate scientist and economist, said, quote, "Our analysis shows that climate change will cause massive economic damages within the next 25 years in almost all countries around the world, also in highly developed ones such as Germany and the U.S., with a projected median income reduction of 11% each, France with 13%, end of quote. These damages are compared to a baseline of no climate change and are then applied against overall expected global growth in gross domestic product. That's according to study lead author Max Kotz, a climate scientist. So while it's 19% globally less than it could have been with no climate change, in most places income will still grow, just not as much because of warmer temperatures. For the past dozen years, scientists and others have been focusing on extreme weather such as heat waves, floods, droughts, storms as having the biggest impact on the climate. But Kotz said that when it comes to financial hit, the researchers found, quote, "The overall impacts are still mainly driven by average warming, overall temperature increases," end of quote. "It harms crops and hinders labor production," he added. Kotz added, quote, "Those temperature increases drive the most damages in the future because they're really the most unprecedented compared to what we've experienced historically," end of quote. Last year, a record hot year, the global average temperature was 2.43 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than pre-industrial times. That's according to the U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. The globe has not had a month cooler than 20th century average since February 1979. In the United States, the southeastern and southwestern states get economically pinched more than the northern ones, with parts of Arizona and New Mexico taking the biggest monetary hit, according to the study. In Europe, southern regions, including parts of Spain and Italy, get hit harder than places like Denmark or northern Germany. Only Arctic-adjacent areas, Canada, Russia, Norway, Finland, and Sweden benefit, according to Kotz. Kotz added that it also means countries which have historically produced fewer greenhouse gas emissions per person and are least able to financially adapt to warming weather are getting the biggest financial harms, too. The world's poorest countries will suffer 61% bigger income loss than the richest ones, according to the calculations of the study. Kotz said, quote, "It underlies some of the injustice elements of climate," end of quote. This new study looked deeper than past research, examining 1,600 global areas that are smaller than countries, took several climate factors into account, and examined how long climate economic shocks last, according to Kotz. The study examined past economic impacts on average global domestic product per person and uses computer simulations to look into the future to come up with their detailed calculations. The study shows that the economic harms over the next 25 years are locked in, with emission cuts producing only small changes in the income reduction. But in the second half of this century, that's when two different possible futures are simulated, showing that cutting carbon emissions now really pays off because of how the heat-trapping gases accumulate. That's according to Kotz. Kotz added that if the world could curb carbon pollution and get down to a trend that limits warming to 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit above pre-industrial times, which is the upper limit of the 2015 Paris Climate Agreement, then the financial hit will stay around 20% in global income. But if emissions increase in a worst-case scenario, the final wallop will be closer to 60%. That shows that the public shouldn't think it's a financial doomsday and nothing can be done. Still, it's worse than a 2015 study that predicted a worst-case income hit of about 25% by the end of the century. Marshall Burke, the Stanford University climate economist who wrote the 2015 study, said this new research is finding that the economic damage ahead is locked in large, quote, "makes a lot of sense," end of quote. Burke, who wasn't part of the study, said he has some issues with some of the technical calculations. Quote, "So I wouldn't put a ton of weight on their specific numerical estimates, but I think the big picture is basically right," end of quote. The conclusions are on the high end compared to other recent studies, but since climate change goes for a long time and economic damage from higher temperatures keep compounding, according to University of California, Davis economist and environmental studies professor Francis Moore, who also was not part of the study, they, quote, "add up to very large numbers," end of quote. She added that that's why fighting climate change clearly passes economists' test of cost versus benefits. So there's the latest on climate change. It's going to get real expensive for us in the future in a lot of different ways. All right, we're going to switch topics here. We're going to get into transgender folks. This is Jeff Mulvihill writing for the Associated Press. This is dated April 17th. 3 court rulings across the U.S. this week delved into laws restricting the rights of transgender kids, including the first time the U.S. Supreme Court has gotten involved in a ban on gender-affirming care. Most Republican-controlled states have now banned gender-affirming health care, such as puberty blockers and hormones, for transgender minors and blocked transgender girls from participating in girls' sports competitions. Most of the measures face legal challenges, and this week's rulings went both ways. The Supreme Court said Idaho can enforce its ban against gender-affirming of health care for minors while lawsuits proceed. An Ohio state judge put on hold a law against health care and sports participation that was about to kick in there, and a federal appeals court ruled that West Virginia cannot keep a transgender girl from participating on her school's track team. So here's some of the rulings and legislative action. On Tuesday, an Ohio judge blocked enforcement of a law that was to take effect on April 24th, banning gender-affirming care for minors and keeping transgender girls off girls' sports teams at schools. Franklin County Judge Michael Holbrook said in his written opinion that it's likely the law, adopted in January with a legislative override of Republican Governor Mike DeWine's veto, violates a requirement that the state's laws address just one issue. He noted that lawmakers added the ban on gender-affirming care to the sports-related legislation because they were unable to adopt it separately. The ban on enforcement is in effect for 2 weeks or until a judge holds a hearing for a request to halt enforcement while the case works its way through the courts. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled on Monday that Idaho can enforce its ban on providing puberty blockers or hormones to minors. The law also bans gender-affirming surgery, which is extremely rare for those under 18 anyway. At least 24 states have put similar bans into law in the last few years, nearly all of them challenged in court. 20 other states are currently enforcing them. The Idaho ruling was the first time the issue reached the Supreme Court, but the justices did not dive into the constitutionality of the ban. Instead, they ruled 6-3 that enforcement can proceed except against the 2 transgender teens who sued. And most of the justices' written opinions dealt with judicial procedure, exploring whether it's proper for courts to impose universal injunctions blocking laws while questions about them move through the courts. In other cases on gender-affirming care are in play, they include the first ban on gender-affirming care for minors was adopted in Arkansas in 2021. It was also the first to be blocked entirely, not just temporarily, by a federal court. Last week, 10 judges on the 8th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals in St. Louis heard arguments on Arkansas's appeal of the ruling that blocked the law. Circuit Court appeals often take months to decide, and any ruling is likely to be appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court, which has already been asked to block similar laws that are in effect in Kentucky and Tennessee. Meanwhile, a 3-judge panel from another federal appeals court, the Richmond, Virginia-based 4th U.S. Circuit, ruled 2-1 Tuesday that the West Virginia's ban against girls' sports competition by transgender girls violates the rights of one teen athlete who challenged it. The result, 13-year-old Becky Pepper Jackson, who was identified as a girl since she was in 3rd grade, can stay on her middle school's girls' cross-country and track and field teams. Attorney General Patrick Morrissey said in a statement that the ban remains in place for others, though an ACLU West Virginia spokesperson said it's not clear that there are any other kids in the state that are impacted by the law. Other judges have temporarily blocked enforcement in Arizona, Idaho, and Utah. But the New York City-based Second Circuit revived a challenge to Connecticut's policy of letting transgender girls compete in girls' sports, sending it back to a lower court last year without ruling on its merits. At least 24 states have laws or policies on the books barring transgender girls and women from certain sports competitions. Most are enforcing them. Some local bans are being litigated. A federal judge refused to block the New York State government from taking legal action against Nassau County's ban, which is also being challenged by a local roller derby league. The pace of Republican efforts to pass restrictions has slowed this year, but measures before legislatures continue to target transgender people. On Monday, Tennessee lawmakers gave nearly final passage to a bill that would require public school employees to notify parents if their student identifies as transgender. States including Alabama, Arizona, Arkansas, Idaho, Indiana, and North Carolina already have similar laws in place. Last week, Alabama lawmakers advanced legislation to define who is considered a man or a woman based on reproductive systems rather than gender identity. Lawmakers in more than a dozen states also are seeking this year to codify a definition of the sexes. So Alabama, where an egg is a chicken, where a seed is a flower, where a sapling is a tree, where a fetus is a person. Now, this is what they ruled. This is what they ruled. Now, they're only going to look at reproductive systems to identify whether you're a man or a woman. So if you have testicles, you're a man. If you have ovaries, you're a woman, and that's going to be the end of it. Well, what about for those people that have both? Because it does happen. It really does, folks. What are you going to do with them? Well, if we continue down the Republican path, we'll probably just exterminate them. Because that's what they're going for. That's what Republicans want. They want to get rid of gay people. They want to get rid of trans people. They want to get rid of people that are different from them. That's it. Period. End of story. And people don't believe me when I say this. Oh. Let's get into our next story here, and then I'll get into my personal beef for this week. Speaking of transgender people, let's get to this story. This is Jan M. Olsen writing for the Associated Press. This is dated April 17th out of Copenhagen, Denmark. The Swedish Parliament passed a law Wednesday lowering the age required for people to legally change their gender from 18 to 16. Those under 18 still need approval from a guardian, a doctor, and the National Board of Health and Welfare. No longer required is a gender dysphoria diagnosis defined by medical professionals as psychological distress experienced by those whose gender expression does not match their gender identity. Sweden joins a number of countries with similar laws, including Denmark, Norway, Finland, and Spain. The vote in Sweden passed 234 to 94 with 21 lawmakers absent following a debate that lasted for nearly 6 hours. Sweden's Democrats, the populist party with far-right roots that supports the government and parliament but is not part of the government, opposed the law. Jimmy Akesson, leader of the Sweden Democrats, told reporters that it was, quote, deplorable that a proposal that clearly lacks the support of the population is so lightly voted through, end of quote. But Johan Holtberg, with the moderates of Sweden's conservative prime minister, Ulf Kristersson, called the outcome gratifying. Holtberg called it, quote, a cautious but important reform for a vulnerable group. I'm glad we're done with it, end of quote. Kristersson's center-right coalition had been split on the issue, with the moderates and the liberals largely supporting the law, while the small Christian Democrats were against it. Peter Sidlund Pankala, chairman of the Swedish Federation for Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Transgender, Queer, and Intersex Rights, known by a Swedish acronym RFSL, called the law's passage, quote, a step in the right direction and a recognition for everyone who has been waiting for decades for a new law, end of quote. Elias Jalander, chairman of the organization's youth branch, said it would make life better for its members. In a statement, he said, quote, going forward, we are pushing to strengthen gender-affirming care to introduce a third legal gender and to ban conversion attempts, end of quote. Last Friday, German lawmakers approved similar legislation making it easier for transgender, intersex, and non-binary people to change their name and gender in official records directly at registry offices. In the UK, the Scottish Parliament in 2022 passed a bill allowing people aged 16 or older to change their gender designation on identity documents by self-declaration. It was vetoed by the British government, a decision that Scotland's highest civil court upheld in December. The legislation set Scotland apart from the rest of the UK, where the minimum age is 18 and a medical diagnosis is required. So that's what's happening over in Europe, and apparently they're more well-enlightened than we are in this country. And the reason we're not enlightened is because of all the maggots that are running around, running loose. Oh, I love it when they say, oh, if Trump gets convicted and goes to jail, put him in jail, this country will riot. Please do, so that you can get the justice you deserve. Unbelievable. These people drive me nuts. I can't even call maggots people. I really can't. They have no brain. They just have all these beliefs, and they just don't think. People don't think, especially people on the right. And that actually kind of gets me to a personal story that I want to relate to this week. Well, I've lost another friend. I hate to say it, but I have. People need to leave me alone and just take for granted what I have to say. That's all that I'm saying right now. Sick of it. Sick of people just blanketly not listening to me, not believing what I have to say. This all comes about from a political cartoon that I posted. The headline of this reads, "Once a cheater, always a cheater." This was in the Chattanooga Times Free Press. The artist, his last name is Bennett. It's a depiction of Donald Trump sitting on a bench with his arm around the USA, depicted as a female, while holding hands with another female that says Russia. In other words, Trump basically colluding with Russia, which is proven. There is evidence of this. Just ask the U.S. Senate, the U.S. House. They've done inquiries into this. This is fact that there was collusion in the 2016 election. Fact. So my former friend Kerry says, what do you think he did with Russia? I said, who does he look up to? Putin, Kim Jong-un, and Xi. He was a wannabe tin pot dictator. Kerry responded, I'm no fan of Trump, but there was no collusion with Russia or anyone you listed for that matter. He ragged on Kim Jong-un pretty hard, which I responded with a laughing emoji because it's total bullshit. Kerry responded, I mean, you can find it funny, but when someone in news media perpetuates false stories, that really isn't very funny. There's enough legit reasons to rag on Trump. Pretending there was Russian collusion isn't any better than what Fox does. Just saying. I said, Kerry, his praise of Putin and Kim is a matter of public record, and I presented several. This is video. President Trump praises talented Kim Jong-un. Next video. Trump defends praise of Kim Jong-un during impromptu press conference. Donald Trump repeats Putin praise at CPAC. Kerry responds, yeah, I'm not currently watching those because I know what happened, and Trump was only praising him after he started the whole Little Rocket Man stuff and started walking back that fight. He was open to meeting with him, which isn't a bad thing. Regardless, that's not what the meme is about. The meme is perpetuating false information. I said, Kerry, Biden has my vote. She says, okay, still don't know what that has to do with you perpetuating false information. So I presented her with a Wall Street Journal article that says what we know about the Trump campaign's collusion with Russia. And again, it provides evidence in there. And she goes, that's from 2017. There was never any collusion. No one charged during that time had charges against them for Russian collusion. I don't know what you're trying to debate here. I'm not the one trying to debate. She's the one that's trying to debate. I posted a meme and she started in. She started it. I finished it. So then Jack Prince decided to chime in, or I asked him to chime in, and he continued with an article from The Hill, which says, Trump has kept his old creepy affections for Putin. Another article, this one I believe is from Politico. All of Trump's Russia ties in 7 charts. Philip Sullivan chimed in. Kerry reared how his little cult minions are amplifying Russian propaganda in the halls of Congress. I wonder where these Russian allegiances came from. And he attached a Washington Post report from April 7th of this year. Top Republicans warns pro-Russia messages are echoed on the House floor. So Carrie decided to chime in against everybody at this point. She said, okay, for the people in the back, and she puts in all capital letters, there was no Russian collusion. It was a disinformation campaign, and I don't give a who the source and the target of the disinformation campaign is. Disinformation campaigns are not okay. I will never support lies because it makes a terrible person stand out in a unique way against someone else doing the exact same. Can't talk about Trump being rapey because Biden is just as bad. Can't talk about Trump being a racist because Biden is probably worse. I could keep going, but you know these things. Hillary Clinton had a Podesta heading her campaign and releasing fake dossiers for f***'s sakes. I'm not a McCarthyite. I don't buy into hating Russia just because it's Russia anyway. But this perpetual Russian collusion is absolutely no better than Fox. Giving Trump for his attempts at having dialogue with Kim Jong-un is as gross as when Fox did it to Obama with the Taliban. Y'all are hypocrites. Part of me can't even blame you because your candidate is so awful you have nothing to work with. But this isn't okay, especially from someone who claims to be news media. Do better. So since she wants me to do better, I said, Carrie, then provide us with your sources and we'll look at them. She then plays dumb and says, sources for what? I said, what news sources are you looking to for your information so I can look into this further? She says, to what specifically? I'm honestly not trying to be difficult. I just don't understand what information you're looking for. No collusion? Because no one was ever charged with anything like that. Okay, I'm going to stop there. Let's say that George W. Bush wasn't charged with being a war criminal, yet he's called a war criminal. Just because somebody isn't charged and convicted doesn't mean that it didn't happen. God, Carrie. She continues, the Russiagate investigation was completely fabricated to gain access to Trump's records because they knew Trump is a shady POS and they would find something to get on him. Hence, the misclassification of accounting records is happening now. Show me one person who has been charged with anything relating to collusion with Russia. If you need help remembering who the Podestas are, you can Google that. I then at that point told Carrie, never mind. And Jack Prince wrapped things up by saying, Darren is absolutely correct identifying Trump's egregious collusion with Putin. There are many empirical examples, and his attraction to despots and dictators should be well known by progressives. There is no argument here, as there is nothing more foolish than the obvious to those who are unwilling to admit the truth. Keep up the good work, Darren. So I have, and I'm going to. And Carrie is no longer a friend. I want nothing to do with her in the future. She was progressive at some point, but now she's gone into the same mentality as Jimmy Dore. And I consider Jimmy Dore a friend, but Jimmy's gone completely insane. He has lost his ever-loving mind. The Young Turks made comment that there may be alcohol involved in this. I don't know about that. I wouldn't go that far. But something is definitely wrong with Jimmy Dore. David Pakman even says there's something wrong with Jimmy Dore. Ever since Jimmy Dore left Pacifica Radio, I don't know what's going on. He has become more conservative in his views. He has Tulsi Gabbard on the regular on his show. Why? Tulsi Gabbard is a conservative, a dyed-in-the-wool, anti-gay conservative. I got news for you. If you still call yourself a progressive and you're still supporting Tulsi Gabbard, I've got news for you. You're not a progressive! Is it that hard to figure out? Unbelievable. I am so sick and tired of people. This is why I have times where I say I want to give up on this show, but you know what? I'm still educating some people. Some people are finally getting it. The wheels are starting to turn in that space where there should be a brain. Folks, it's really simple. If you don't believe in single-payer universal health care, you are not a progressive. If you don't believe in raising the minimum wage to at least $15 an hour, you are not a progressive. If you don't believe that there was collusion between Donald Trump and Russia when there's absolute evidence to this, then you're not a progressive. It's that simple. I'm going to be the gatekeeper. That's all there is to it. Oh, Pakman says I'm not going to be the gatekeeper. Well, I tell you what, I'm going to. You want to know who progressive is? You just ask me and I'll tell you. And about the only one left in Congress is Bernie Sanders. That's it. And by the way, if you support Medicare Advantage, you're a piece of shit and a conservative. Let me just add that. Speaking of pieces of shit, let's get to our next story here. This is Brendan Farrington writing for the Associated Press. This is dated April 16th out of Tallahassee, Florida. 2 years ago, Democrats repeatedly and forcefully warned Republicans and Governor Ron DeSantis that a new law making it easier to challenge school books was so broadly worded that it would create havoc across the state. Now they can say my 4 favorite words to tell people. I told you so. DeSantis backtracked on the 2022 law on Tuesday when he signed a bill narrowing its focus. He blamed liberal activists for abusing the law, not the citizens whose objections to certain books account for the majority of book removals from school libraries and classrooms. Of course he did. The day before the bill signing, DeSantis said, quote, "The idea that someone can use the parents' rights and the curriculum transparency to start objecting to every single book to try to make a mockery of this is just wrong. That's performative, that's political." End of quote. No, it ain't. No, hey, you signed the bill. You're the one that signed it. Now you can deal with it. Coincidentally, PEN America, a group that fights book bans, issued a report Tuesday saying Florida is responsible for 72% of the books that have been pulled from the nation's schools in the first half of the current school year. The organization said liberal activists are not the ones who should be blamed for abusing the law. Casey Meehan, PEN America's Freedom to Read program director, said, quote, "The majority of books that we see being removed are books that talk about LGBTQ plus identities, that include characters of color, that talk about race and racism, that include depictions of sexual experiences and the most broad interpretation of that understanding." End of quote. Those challenges are being made by conservative individuals and groups such as Moms for Liberty, which is a fascist group. They are fascist. They have been identified as a hate group by the Southern Poverty Law Center. The original law allowed any person, parent or not, district resident or not, to challenge books as often as they wanted. Once challenged, a book has to be pulled from shelves until the school district resolves the complaint. The new law limits people who don't have students in a school district to 1 challenge per month. The PEN America report says Florida is responsible for 3,135 of the 4,349 school book bans in the United States so far this year. Just this week in conservative Clay County, one person challenged 40 books, according to Meehan. Before dropping out of the Republican presidential primary, DeSantis campaigned heavily on his education platform, including the law giving people more power to challenge books. House Democratic leader Fentress Driscoll said, quote, "It's just a big mess that DeSantis created, and now he's trying to disown it. But I don't know if he'll be able to distance himself from this because he campaigned on it so hard." End of quote. Yeah, you got that right. It's not the only example of the tough-talking governor having to make adjustments to ideology he championed while seeking the White House. He also has made concessions in the settlement of several lawsuits involving the state and Walt Disney World. The dispute between them erupted in 2022 after the company spoke out against a death sentence-backed law that opponents dubbed Don't Say Gay. The law bans classroom lessons on gender identity and sexual orientation. The Associated Press asked DeSantis' office for examples of liberal activists abusing the law, and it provided one. Chaz Stevens, a South Florida resident who has often lampooned government. Stevens raised challenges in dozens of school districts over the Bible, dictionaries, and thesauruses. Death sentence spokeswoman Julia Friedland said in an email that the challenge to the law, quote, "ensures that book challenges are limited for individuals like Chaz who do not have children with access to the school district's materials," end of quote. She didn't reply to follow-up emails requesting more examples. Stevens, who 11 years ago made national news when he installed a Festivus pole made out of beer cans across from a nativity scene displayed in the Capitol, was delighted DeSantis' office singled him out. Stevens said, quote, "When they need to make stupid stupider, they send me up. I'm part comedian, I'm part activist, I'm part artist. I just want a better society. I'm an idiot but a smart guy at the same time." End of quote. You got that. While DeSantis' predecessor, current Republican Senator Rick Scott, allowed what then called the free speech zone in the Capitol Rotunda. The rules changed under death sentence, and new barriers were put in place to use Capitol space for political expression. The League of Women Voters in Stevens are among the applicants who have been denied access under the new rules. Stevens said, quote, "I didn't realize that I have the power of millions. I'm just one guy. I'm an agitator. I know my role in this." End of quote. Driscoll pointed out the death sentence was warned there would be problems when the book ban law passed in 2022. She said, quote, "We told him so. The Florida House Democrats on the floor in our debate and our questioning pointed out the vagueness in the original law and how it could be subject to abuse. Chaz is not the problem. It's the folks who are taking liberties with the law who are the problem." End of quote. Yeah, that's exactly right, folks. I want to real quickly mention on Wednesday, the Senate rejected the impeachment articles against Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. So there is now no more trial in the U.S. Senate against Mayorkas. The votes were 51-48 and 51-49, both along party lines. Mayorkas was charged with willful and systemic refusal to comply with immigration law, and a second article charged him with a breach of trust, saying that the border was secure. So there you go, folks. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said the House Republicans' charges failed to meet the high standard of high crimes and misdemeanors and could set a dangerous precedent. Schumer said, quote, "For the sake of the Senate's integrity and protect impeachment for those rare cases we truly need it, senators should dismiss today's charges." End of quote. And good for him. The Republicans are now howling about this. I don't care. The Republicans can howl at the moon, bay at the moon all you want, because it ain't happening. First time in the history of this country, over 225 years, almost 250 years at this point, where the Congress has thrown out charges in the Senate against a member of the cabinet. I love it. It's great news. It's absolutely fantastic. I want to get to this story because this is an update to a story that we have talked about on this show. This is Joy Capoletti and Ed White writing for the Associated Press. This is dated April 16th out of Lansing, Michigan. Prosecutors charged the former leader of the Michigan House and his wife with financial crimes Tuesday, alleging they milked political accounts for personal travel, housing, and other benefits while the Republican lawmaker was raising millions of dollars from his powerful post. Attorney General Dana Nessel said that Lee Chatfield misused various political funds, including his Peninsula Fund, which was not required to report the names of donors and served as an unregulated slush fund. The operation was a family affair, as wife Stephanie Chatfield monitored her husband's credit card balance and paid it off with cash from the Peninsula Fund, including $132,000 over a 14-month period. In another example, Nessel said that Lee Chatfield's brother cashed a $5,000 check from a political fund in 2020 and returned $3,500 to the lawmaker ahead of a vacation. Lee Chatfield's various political funds took in more than $5 million over 6 years, including more than $2 million in 2020, which was his last year as Speaker. That's according to Attorney General Dana Nessel, who added, quote, "To call him, as many have, a prodigious fundraiser would not be an exaggeration." End of quote. Chatfield faces 13 charges, including conducting a criminal enterprise which carries a maximum prison sentence of 20 years. He's also been charged with embezzlement. Chatfield's attorney, Mary Chartier, said she'll fight the charges, quote, "each and every step of the way. It took almost 2.5 years for the AG's office to come up with the charges. It's going to be pretty flimsy if it took that long." End of quote. Oh, now she's saying it's going to be flimsy. Oh, I just can't believe that. Dana Nessel is well known for dotting her I's and crossing her T's, so this is going to be a slam dunk case for the Attorney General. I guarantee it. Mark my words. You heard it right here on Southpaws on April 19th, 2024. This is going to be a slam dunk case. Stephanie Chatfield was charged with embezzlement. A message seeking comment from her lawyer, Matt Newberg, was not immediately returned. I've heard that name, Matt Newberg, before. I believe he is a Republican operative of some kind. Nessel said there's been a proliferation of dark money political funds. She said the Peninsula Fund was organized under federal law as a tax-exempt social welfare organization. She said, quote, the Michigan Campaign Finance Act is effectively toothless, useless, and utterly worthless as a deterrent to these crimes. The misuse of social welfare funds is not a new practice in Lansing, and while Lee Chatfield may have exploited the system a little bit more than others, no one political party alone has perverted or abused it, end of quote. Separately, there was a renewed call Tuesday to expand financial disclosure laws in Michigan. Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson said, quote, we won't give up on seeking the type of anti-corruption laws that this state needs that most other states have. These charges really underscore the real necessity to more people in Lansing than ever before, end of quote. The Chatfield investigation began in 2022 when his sister-in-law publicly said that he sexually assaulted her. He has denied the allegations and said they had a consensual affair. Oh, really? Consensual? Investigators eventually expanded the case beyond those claims. Nessel said there was insufficient evidence to charge Lee Chatfield based on Rebecca Chatfield's allegations, though she praised her courage in stepping forward. The Attorney General said, quote, were it not for her, we likely wouldn't be here today, end of quote. Two people who were top aides to Lee Chatfield when he ran the House were charged last year with crimes, including embezzlement from nonprofits created for political purposes. Rob and Ann Menard have pleaded not guilty. So there you go, folks. Lee Chatfield is in deep doo-doo, and deservedly so. All right, I want to get to our next story here. This is going to be our final story for today. This comes out of Michigan. This is Byron Tollefson writing for Wood Television. This is dated April 16th out of Georgetown Township, which is just outside of Grand Rapids. Aspen Lamfer's parents said she was perfectly healthy, excelled at several sports, and thrived in the classroom before a trip to a Jennison Wendy's in August 2022 changed everything. The family's attorney, Tom Worsford, said, quote, it's almost a miracle she survived, end of quote. The family is from Hudsonville, Michigan, which is not very far from Jennison. After her team softball practice, the 11-year-old girl went to the restaurant on Port Sheldon Street and ordered a hamburger, chicken nuggets, and French fries. A few days later, her family says she had abdominal cramps, diarrhea, and blood in her stool. She was hospitalized with an E. coli infection, which later turned into hemolytic uremic syndrome, or HUS, and attacked her kidneys. She was admitted to Helen DeVos Children's Hospital, and things only got worse. Attorney Worsford said, quote, the infection continued to progress and attacked her pancreas and her brain. She had significant brain swelling, suffering seizures while in the hospital. She had left-sided paralysis, end of quote. Aspen was on constant dialysis for her kidney issues. She was unconscious at times and hallucinated. Family attorney said, quote, her parents took a video of her crying out in the hospital, asking, why am I so sick? It's just so bad. That terror for an 11-year-old girl needs to be compensated. End of quote. She was hospitalized at DeVos Children's Hospital for 3 weeks before rehabbing at Mary Free Bed for a week. Aspen finally went home more than a month after her initial hospitalization. Worsfold said, quote, her family is so thankful that they have her that she didn't pass from this because it was so close. End of quote. He said that Aspen is still struggling with high blood pressure, weakness on the left side of her body, diabetes, and brain damage, which has affected her ability to learn. Worsfold said, quote, the spring before she got sick, she placed as a 5th grader in 6th grade level of reading. 1 year later, after she got sick as a 6th grader, she was now reading at a 4th grade level. Aspen tested in the 70th percentile for math on the Michigan Student Test of Educational Progress before the incident. 1 year after getting sick, she was in the 9th percentile. The Lamfers are now suing Meritage Hospitality Group, the company that owns more than 380 Wendy's, Taco John's, Morning Bell, and Stan's Taco locations across 16 states. The family is asking for $20 million in damages, including past and future economic losses. Worsfold said they are accounting for an expected loss of lifetime earning potential because of her brain injury and cognitive impairments. Meritage did not respond to Channel 8's request for comment by publication. Aspen's family said they did not know that when she went to Wendy's, the restaurant had shut down just days prior. During a safety check on July 27th, Ottawa County food inspectors found what they called, quote, gross insanitary conditions throughout, end of quote, the building. Worsfold said, quote, it was really disgusting to be quite frank, end of quote. According to health records, investigators found moldy and spoiled food, including day-old chili, left out. They also found undated produce. Food slicing and cutting boards were kept out dirty. Food was left on the ground overnight. Investigators found mold and mildew throughout the restaurant and water pooled everywhere. The inspectors wrote that the, quote, facility throughout is dirty and an excessive end of the spectrum, end of quote. Investigators also saw leaking water flowing over electrical areas. Inspectors added, quote, imminent health hazards demand immediate correction such as closure and fixing health hazards observed. Immediate health risks may get the staff and public sick, end of quote. The restaurant's food license was not posted either, according to investigators. Health records showed that the restaurant voluntarily closed in late July because of health risks, allowing staff to be retrained on food safety practices and for water leaks to be fixed. They reopened by August 1st, the day Aspen ate at the restaurant. But investigators found more violations just a few days later. Potentially hazardous food was not stored and cooled properly. Inspectors found standing water with dead pests around the chili area. Kitchen floors were soiled with black mold-like debris, according to the inspection report. Worsfold said, quote, many of the same problem areas were present with employees not changing gloves, not washing their hands. One of the hand-washing sinks wasn't stocked properly, end of quote. Health inspections show the restaurant has improved conditions since its temporary closure. Earlier this month, several other West Michigan residents sued Meritage, saying they were sickened by contaminated lettuce at Wendy's restaurants during the E. coli outbreak in 2022. Worsfold said Aspen didn't eat any lettuce, but he believes that she got sick through cross-contamination. Worsfold said, quote, it's really the only explanation that caused her to contract this infection, end of quote. That's what happens when food inspection reports are not posted in the window and grades are posted in the window at each restaurant. That needs to happen in Michigan. That's it for this week. I'm Darren Gibson. Please support independent media, the First Amendment, and a woman's right to choose.
The stations that carry Southpaws do not necessarily share the opinions expressed on the show. Southpaws is protected by the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution and is copyrighted by Big D Entertainment. All rights reserved.